So, what could a tiny fib to a customer and a massive, multi-billion-dollar financial meltdown possibly have in common? Well, they both start with a single choice, an ethical choice. In this explainer, we're going to build a complete guide to business ethics, all the way from the small decisions you make every day to the huge legal systems that shape our entire corporate world. Okay, let's get into it. Just think about your typical workday for a second. You make hundreds, maybe thousands of little decisions. But which of those are ethical decisions? It's that moment you have to pause, the one where you realize, hey, what I do next could really affect someone else. That's the spark. That's exactly where business ethics kicks in. All right, to really wrap our heads around all this, we're going to tackle it in 5 parts. First, we'll build our own ethical compass. Then we'll learn to spot the most common traps. After that, we'll look at the official rules of the road, see how those rules got made. And finally, we'll lay out the blueprint for building a genuinely great ethical business. Okay, let's start with the most important tool in our kit. Before you can navigate any tricky situation, you need a compass that points true north. In the business world, that means really understanding the core values that guide us. It really boils down to these 3 pillars. They're the absolute bedrock of ethical business. Take a look. Integrity isn't just about not telling a lie. It's about being whole, consistent, and transparent in everything you do. Honesty is that straight-up commitment to the truth. And fairness? That's the vital guardrail that keeps bias out of your decisions. Just about every corporate scandal you've ever read about is, at its heart, a story of one of these 3 pillars completely crumbling. So, we have our compass. Now let's look at what happens when that compass breaks. Let's get into the real-world messes that happen when these core values get tossed aside. First on the list, bribery. This one is a direct assault on fairness. It's basically paying to cut in line, but on a massive scale. It completely warps the decision-making process and destroys any hope of a level playing field for everyone else. And then you've got fraud. This is a flat-out, deliberate betrayal of honesty. And the key word here is purposeful. This is not an accident. It's not an oops moment. It's a calculated plan to deceive someone in order to harm them and benefit yourself. Now, sexual harassment is another critical and very serious breach of ethics. It can show up in a lot of different ways, but here's the single most important thing to understand from a legal perspective. The law cares about the impact of the behavior on the victim, not the intent of the harasser. That old line, "I was just joking," isn't just a terrible excuse. Legally, it's completely irrelevant. So for behavior to legally be considered a hostile work environment, it has to pass 3 specific tests. 1, the conduct has to be unwelcome. That's a given. 2, it needs to be so severe or happen so often that it actually changes the conditions of your employment. And 3, a so-called reasonable person would have to agree that, yeah, this environment is hostile. It's how the legal system tries to put an objective standard on a deeply personal and damaging experience. Okay, so we've looked at the problems. Now, how does the system actually respond? Well, the rules of ethical business basically come in 2 different flavors, and knowing the difference between them is absolutely key. Here's a good way to think about it. The mandated boundaries, that's the floor. It's the absolute bare minimum society requires through laws. Every business has to meet this standard. But voluntary boundaries, that's the ceiling. That's a company deciding for itself how high it wants to reach, based on its own values and culture. It's the choice to go way beyond what's just legally required. In this diagram just illustrates that perfectly. See how it all starts from the inside and works its way out? Right at the very center, you have the company's culture. That culture creates the values. Those values then drive the voluntary actions a company takes. Legal compliance is that final outer ring. It's the non-negotiable fence that everything else has to operate within. But that outer fence, all those laws and regulations, they didn't just appear out of nowhere. They were basically forged in the fire of major ethical disasters. They're society's direct response to crises that just got too big to ignore. Just look at this timeline. Each of these huge landmark laws came about because something went horribly wrong. The Sherman Act was created to fight monopolies, the Civil Rights Act to combat systemic discrimination. Sarbanes-Oxley was born from the ashes of the Enron accounting fraud, and the Dodd-Frank Act was a direct result of the 2008 financial crisis. You could say that laws are like society's scar tissue. They form where we've been hurt the most. Let's zoom in on Sarbanes-Oxley, or SOX, for a minute. After the Enron scandal, public trust was shattered. The system was clearly broken. SOX was like the emergency repair kit. It created a brand new watchdog for the accounting industry. It made the penalties for fraud way more severe. It forced companies to have official codes of ethics. And this part is huge. It gave real legal protections to whistleblowers, the brave employees who speak up.
So all of this brings us to the modern era of business ethics. You see, the whole system has evolved. It's not just about punishing the bad guys anymore. Now it's about actively encouraging companies to build strong ethical cultures from the inside out.
So what's the biggest incentive of all? It's a set of rules called the Federal Sentencing Guidelines for Organizations, or FSGO. And this was a real game changer. It's basically the government saying, hey companies, look, we know bad things can happen, but if they do, we are going to look very closely at what you did beforehand to try and prevent it. And that will make a massive difference in your punishment. And the FSGO doesn't leave you guessing. It gives you a 7-step roadmap for what a good program looks like. You've got to have a code of conduct with someone high up in charge. You have to train people, monitor for problems, and be careful who you give power to. And if something does go wrong, you have to enforce your own rules and have a plan to prevent it from happening again. If a company does all this, it can see its fines slashed. It's the government's way of saying good ethics is literally good business. And that brings us to our final thought. Laws and regulations, they set the floor. They are the absolute bare minimum for behavior. But simply following the rules doesn't make a company great. So the real question is, what are the voluntary choices, the core values, and the deep-seated cultural habits that allow a business not just to stay out of trouble, but to truly soar? That is the difference between simple compliance and true ethical leadership.